Yeah, one of those is John Piper, who many of us are familiar with, who's been here again recently. If you have nice little categories for joy is what Christians have and happiness is what the world has, you can scrap those when you go to the Bible. Because the Bible is indiscriminate in its uses of the language of happiness and joy and contentment and satisfaction. I'll never forget when I was researching my happiness book and I was reading all of these sources, and people are sending me links to sermons of that their pastor just preached on how God doesn't want Christians to be happy. He wants us to be joyful and all of this. It was at the point where I was reading so many things that was getting a bit discouraging because I felt like the biblical message of the gospel of happiness, the good news of happiness, was not simply not coming across. It was actually being thwarted through many of the statements that were being made. And so I received in my inbox an email from Johnny Erickson Tata, who Nancy and I just love. She's just one of the dearest people that we know, who is a true, deep thinker. She's not simply a woman in a wheelchair. She's a woman who's a follower of Jesus and who has been conformed to the image of Christ through her experiences in that wheelchair. But here's what she said in her little daily thing that I read that morning. And I literally nearly shouted. I did get up and I just went, yes, yes. We're often taught to be careful of the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness, it is said, is an emotion that depends upon what happens. That, by the way, is called etymology. And you can take a word in the English and you can say, okay, well, this is a word that it comes from. So if you ever heard somebody preach that Scripture talks about this word dunamis, it's the word for power, from which we get our word dynamite. So what Scripture tells us is that we have the dynamite of God. Well, no, it doesn't really say that. It's just that that word came from that. Many words came from many different words. Many of them had secular beginnings, but then became embraced by Christians. So don't let that fool you if you hear somebody say, well, happiness comes from the word hap, which has to do with circumstances, and so happiness is all about circumstance. That's not the way you understand what a word means. Joy, by contrast, Johnny says, is supposed to be enduring, stemming deep from within our soul, and which is not affected by circumstances surrounding us. And then she says, I don't think God had any such hair-splitting in mind. Scripture uses the terms interchangeably along with words like delight, gladness, blessed. So then she finishes with this. There is no scale of relative spiritual values applied to any of these. Happiness is not relegated to fleshly-minded sinners, nor joy to heaven-bound saints. Let's let words mean what they say and not make false distinctions and definitions and turn synonyms into opposites. In fact, there's numbers of quotes I have in the book where people say happiness and joy are the opposite of each other, which everyone in the world knows that's not true. That's just something that some Christians started saying, and even the statement, joy is not an emotion, which is very, very commonly stated. If you look it up online, I found something like 15,000 appearances of those exact words, not just in that ballpark, but those exact words. Joy is not an emotion. And almost every one of them is stated in a sermon or a Christian book or a Christian article. That's what Christians say. That's not the way the world thinks, because the world, if you ask the average person, what do you want more than anything else? I want to be happy. That's not the only thing I want. Don't get me wrong. I want to be a good person. I want to be moral. I want to help people, but I want to be happy. If you ask people, what do you really want for your kids? Well, yes, I want them to be polite. I want them to be responsible. But won't they often say, and really, ultimately, I really want them to be happy? So should we be telling all these parents, you shouldn't want your kids to be happy? Or tell the kids you shouldn't want to be happy? Are we sending the message to the world, God doesn't want people to be happy? He's our Father. So in Scripture, we have these overlapping circles. And you see these English words, And in my book, I've got the Hebrew and Greek words, some of them in a similar kind of Venn diagram thing where you've got these circles. And see how they all overlap. Oh, there's a little nuance, a little difference, here and there. But that's what these words mean. So Spurgeon says, my dear brothers, if anyone in the world ought to be happy, we are the people. How boundless our privileges, how brilliant our hopes.